security forces couldn't cope with. And also they started these huge, bold attacks, trying to take provincial capitals. Kunduz, they took twice temporarily. They attempted taking over Helmand province, and then Farah province, the provincial capitals. And that continued between 2015 and 2016. And then in 2017, the Afghan government seems to have got a hang of it. And so they started using more aerial operations, and the Americans helped them with that, and that changed the game. The aerial operations was something that the Taliban didn't have an answer to. So they lost some territory, they were suffering casualties, and so they had to change their strategy and transfer those losses to the government side. And that's why they went back to something that they're best at, suicide bombers, car bombs, things that create big headlines, blocking highways, and that is what this seems to be doing. So although it is more a response to the government challenge, it has been devastating nonetheless, and very, very complex and very, very active.
You might think it would be difficult to attack a military base and cause so many casualties. What of the Afghan National Army, what have the security forces, the government said about how they might better protect some of their personnel and their bases?
Well, so far, realistically, they haven't come up with a solution, and the solution seems to be better intelligence, so that the government forces know where these vehicles are coming from and where they are going to attack. And that is something that the government has failed despite all the investment in the past decade and a half. The two areas that is doing well is the special forces and the air support, Air Force. But intelligence is something that they could improve on, and that's going to be perhaps the only thing that can assist in stopping these casualties.
And that's BBC Afghan's Aulia Atrafi, who was also telling me after we finished recording about the locations of some of these places. A bit of a mixture really between attacks. Military personnel are also Tuesday's attack, for example, killed a police chief targeting the police HQ. The one last night, though, was between Kandahar and Helmand, more of a frontline kind of area, and Helmand is that province where the Taliban have much influence. You're listening to OS on the BBC World Service. It's Ben James with you in the middle of the BBC newsroom today. Let me give you some of these stories from the Africa Live page right now. Togo's opposition is defying a government ban on weekday protests by planning a second day of protests today. 4 people were shot dead in violence after gunmen killed dozens of people in remote villages in the centre of the country. And the British banking groups HSBC and Standard Chartered are likely to be investigated over new claims they may have been used to launder money stolen from the South African state. The money was allegedly stolen by South Africa's President Jacob Zuma and a wealthy business family, the Guptas. The banking groups, Mr Zuma and the Guptas, have all denied any wrongdoing. OS on the BBC at 18 minutes past 4 here in London. We have a visitor to our desk, Olga Ivshina, special correspondent for BBC Russian. Olga, good to have you here with us to tell us about Ksenia Sobchak. Now, she's the Russian TV presenter, the socialite, who about 24 hours ago announced that she would run for president next year against Vladimir Putin. So, for people who don't know, perhaps people outside of Russia, who is she?
So there were rumors that she might come, and she presents herself as a oppositional candidate, as the one you should vote for if you don't want to vote for Putin or any of his friends or allies. But actually, this is a more complicated story, because she is daughter of Putin's close friend, Sobchak, Anatoly Sobchak. He was a mayor of St. Petersburg, and he actually took Putin on on board when he finished his service in KGB. And for many, many years they were working together. So she's a close family friend. She turned to be an opposition activist. She was leading one of the leaders of mass protests in Russia in 2012. But many analytics and many critics now think that she would be a spoiler and not a proper opposition candidate, even though she claims the opposite.
So a spoiler as in she's someone that is kind of working for the government somehow?
So, yes, some political analysts suspect that they broke a deal with Putin, and she's sort of a muppet, so to say. Well, it's just this is just one of the theories.
Sure.
They say that she represents opposition in a way Kremlin wants it to see. So rather than voting for Navalny, who's a prominent opposition leader at the moment, but he strongly criticizes Kremlin, Putin rather wants someone who would obey his orders more. So he broke a deal with Sobchak, who would criticize him, but not that harshly. This is one of the theories, but Sobchak, of course, denies it all, and she says she's a proper candidate and she's ready to, continue the fight up to the end. And moreover, she said she's ready to step down if Navalny, the main opposition candidate, would be allowed to run. But as far as BBC Russia knows, as far as our sources in the Kremlin told us, he won't be allowed to run.
And I noticed that on your site you put together a video. It's about 24 hours, like I said, since she announced her candidacy, asking people, I think in Moscow, what they thought about her, what they felt when they heard her name. People talking about the TV show, I think, that she hosted, which was kind of like a Big Brother style show. And also one guy saying...
It was a dating show.
A dating show,
yes,
right, okay.
Show.
And also one person saying that she was Trump in a skirt, I think one of the people you interviewed was. Do we know what her politics are? Are they similar to Donald Trump's?
Well, not that much, no. So first of all, she's 35 years old. She's not that. So she hasn't been in opposition politics for that long. She's quite young, and also she's quite a controversial figure because most of her time in the public eye, she was just a journalist, a presenter. She was presenting various shows, not political ones. She only joined the opposition in 2011 probably, so she took part in those mass protests, but quite often she said that she's just a journalist but not a politician.
And has there been any reaction from Vladimir Putin, from the ruling party? Have you spoken to anyone about her candidacy?
Well, Putin hasn't commented yet, but a journalist spoke to his spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, and he said that, she's a clever lady, she might be a good candidate, but definitely, politics is very much different from journalism.
It'll be a story we'll continue to watch. Thank you, Olga Ivshina, for coming over to tell us about it. Olga is with BBC Russian. You can get your news from the BBC in Russian at bbcrussian.com. OS on the BBC World Service. We've already been talking this week about the Communist Party Congress in Beijing, and that Congress takes place once every 5 years, a closed-door summit. It determines who rules China, the country's direction for the next term. President Xi Jinping is expected to remain as party chief. On the programme this time yesterday, you heard us give the highlights of the speech that he made to open that Congress. It'll keep going for a few days yet. We've been talking also this week to the BBC's China editor, Carrie Gracie. You heard much of an interview with her a couple of days ago on the programme. But here's some more. She spoke to Nuala McGovern about the difficulties of covering a Chinese Congress and working as a foreign correspondent in China in general.
One of the very central challenges that we have at the moment is it is very hard to use the internet in China right now. I know that's something that a lot of people know about China, but it's hard to really get across how enormously disruptive it is of a working life when you actually can't even send emails, let alone kind of use your tunneling device to get through the Great Firewall of China in order to use, social media that we would take for granted in the outside world. So the Great Firewall of China is ever more daunting, ever more fierce and determined to get after anyone who's found a crack through it. And right now for Congress, it really is extremely hard for Chinese citizens or Westerners to actually make the devices work, which will get you across it onto the other side. So that's one aspect of the difficulty of covering a Chinese Congress. I suppose another aspect is that, information is security here, and national security is the absolute mantra of Xi Jinping. It has been over 5 years. Many people have gone to prison for leaks or, leaking state secrets, as it's called. And so actually getting information about what's going on in terms of elite politics is well nigh impossible. There's a lot of gossip about what's going on in elite politics, but it is just that, in my view. You can't really trust sources. People have got an axe to grind. Often if they're saying something, it's because they want to get a certain message out there, whether it's true or not. So there's an enormous amount of fake news, I would say, within the swirl of this Chinese political gossip. And actually, at the end of the day, you just have to wait to see what it says in the work report, what it says in the amended constitution, and who actually walks out on stage at the end of this. And it's only really those really graspable hard facts that you can draw any conclusions from.
That's Carrie Gracie, our China editor, speaking to us around the China Communist Party Congress. You're listening to OS on the BBC World Service. Now, just noticed on the screens to our left, we can see all different outside sources coming into this building. Vladimir Putin has been speaking. Let's have a little listen.
Law. We feel concerned about this, about the consequences of this process. Could you comment on this, please? Thanks. When the situation with Mr. Magnitsky, who has passed away in prison, happened,
taking questions in Sochi is Vladimir Putin at something called the Valdai Discussion Club. Let me tell you some of the things he's already been saying, a couple of interesting things on there. One story we've already spoken about on this programme, the story of Catalonia. Vladimir Putin saying that the stance of the EU on the independence referendum there is, quote, the most glaring example of double standards, referencing the Russian annexation of Crimea as his example of why that is, and the EU's stance on that, a theme that he's come to before when discussing Kosovo as well. Something else that he's been talking about, that Putin says Russia is ready to develop new weapon systems in response to other countries doing the same. So we'll wait and see what else he says, and perhaps bring down somebody from BBC Russian again to talk more about that and put it into some context for us. But we'll keep an ear across what Vladimir Putin is saying in Sochi through the rest of the programme. Another big story we've been talking about on OS, the series of allegations against the Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. Daily updates on the people across the world reacting to the story, many also talking about their personal experiences. Today, the actor Tom Hanks has been describing the sexual misconduct claims as a watershed moment that will lead to a sea change in Hollywood. The Oscar winner said the Weinstein name would become synonymous with a complete reversal in fortunes. The British Film Institute has this afternoon stripped Harvey Weinstein of his fellowship, its highest honour. He's unequivocally denied having anything other than consensual sex. Have a listen, though, to what Tom Hanks said about the women making claims of sexual harassment.
First, we got to hear from everybody so that we understand how vast and how all-encompassing this was. That's A. B is, it's all got to change. Look, since when has this brand of common decency and professionalism been put on hold just because of sexual dynamics in the workplace? It's inexcusable.
Tom Hanks talking about the Harvey Weinstein story. We've got an update from the 100 Women team in the next half hour of OS on their work on their harassment on public transport.
This is the BBC World Service, where we have been in the studio making a podcast. Inspiration is for amateurs.
I want people's senses to be engaged.
This is magical.
The podcast is called In the Studio.
How did you do this? What's real? What's not?
We're going to visit some of the world's great creative minds in their places of work.
Okay, how do we make this thing?
It is a wonderfully chaotic place.
If I hit the keys, there's no sound.
I like things that defy gravity.
Just say the goddamn line.
I think there's something very inspiring about being in a place where inspiration has struck.
It was the big eureka moment.
And I think if you want to understand a work of art better,
Okay, scrap that idea.
talking to the personal people who've created it in the spaces in which they've created
That
it
was my grandfather clock.
is a fantastic way in.
I think that's it.
In the Studio. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts or go to bbcworldservice.com/in the studio.
This is OS on the BBC World Service. It's Ben James in position in the middle of our newsroom for you today. We're going to bring your voices into the coverage that the colleagues around me are producing. Tweeting us at BBC OS is one way to tell your story or respond to the ones we're talking about already. One of those this week has been the work our 100 Women team has been doing on combating sexual harassment on public transport. So we'll get an update from them in about 10 minutes on the programme to find out how they're getting on.
BBC News with Marion Marshall. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia's autonomous powers on Saturday. The cabinet will draw up measures for formal approval under Article 155 of the Constitution. It's never been invoked before. The move came after the Catalan leader threatened to get the regional parliament to ratify independence if Madrid refused to talk. The Kenyan opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has reportedly told the head of the country's electoral body that next week's rerun of September's presidential poll should be postponed. On Wednesday, the official, Wafula Chebukati, said he could not deliver a credible election in the current circumstances. The United Nations says it's worried by reports of the forced displacement of civilians, mainly Kurds, in northern Iraq. Iraqi government forces have advanced into areas formerly controlled by the Kurdish authorities, including the city of Kirkuk, following a referendum on Kurdish independence. European Union leaders have arrived for a summit in Brussels, stressing their unity. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, said they were united in support for Spain over the crisis in Catalonia, and united behind the EU's negotiator, Michel Barnier, in the Brexit talks. Over dinner, they'll hear the British Prime Minister Theresa May set out her latest thoughts about Britain's withdrawal from the EU. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the Siberian lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. They say more must be done to stop polluted water flowing into the lake, killing its unique flora and fauna. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, the actress Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Starting at the age of 14, Danielle Darrieux played opposite some of the biggest names of the day, both in France and in Hollywood. BBC World Service News.
Welcome back into the BBC newsroom. It's Ben James with OS today. We'll get some sports news from the BBC Sports Centre in about 15 minutes on the programme. One story we may cover is this breaking line through the Reuters news agency that Fernando Alonso has signed a contract extension with the McLaren Formula One team for 2018. That's in a statement from that team that's just come to us. One of my colleagues from BBC Trending is sitting down at the desk with us to talk in a few minutes' time more about the Harvey Weinstein story and to go into some more of the strands of the social media conversation as a result of that. First of all, though, let's speak to our security correspondent Frank Gardner, who's also next to us here in the newsroom. Frank, welcome to talk about Niger. Yesterday on the programme we were talking to a couple of people who'd lost family in battle about the controversy around Donald Trump's phone calls and presidential phone calls to fallen service personnel. This has come from a story from Niger, where a US soldier was killed. The president called the widow of Sergeant LaDavid T. Johnson and was said to have said that her husband, quote, knew what he signed up for, referring to the soldier only as, quote, your guy. Donald Trump denying it was a negative phone call. Now, one thing, Frank, that a lot of people have been talking about was actually...
including 4 US servicemen, and that, I think, is probably a big shock to Americans that their troops are fighting there in a very deadly covert war. Semi-covert.
Niger being a landlocked country to the north of Nigeria, to the east of Mali, to the south of Algeria and Libya. I'm looking at it on our map here, and those long borders in those really remote areas, you're talking about these groups as being transnational. Is it very difficult to actually have a border? Is that part of the problem, that they're going here, there and everywhere in that region?
The border is a line on the map, that's it. There are outposts which they attack. Often the jihadists are far better armed than the government security forces, so they'll use rocket-propelled grenades, they'll use mortars. The US and the French, particularly, the French are trying to guarantee security in that part of the world. They committed enormous forces to Mali, so over 3,000. They turned back Al-Qaeda's occupation of northern Mali, but they haven't been able to eradicate the problem. And across all of these countries, there is a fear that as ISIS loses control of the areas it had in Syria and Iraq, their fighters will be tempted to regroup in these ungoverned spaces of the Sahel, the countries I mentioned.
Frank Gardner, it's always great to have your expertise on OS. Frank Gardner is our security correspondent, helping us understand exactly what is going on in Niger and why American troops were there. You're listening to OS on the BBC World Service. Now, all of this week, the 100 Women team have been talking about the problem of sexual harassment on public transport. You may have seen their videos on our Facebook page. And also, you might remember that we had a big discussion on the programme on Monday, talking to a range of women and men about their personal experiences. Now, following that, the team of experts, part of the discussion on Monday, have been working together to come up with a possible solution, which we'll reveal tomorrow here on the programme. But let's get a check on how they're getting on and go live to the BBC's Nancy Kacungira, who... Nancy, you're in somewhere called the Machines Room in East London. What is the Machines Room?
I have to say, Ben, it's painfully hip. I'm surprised they let me in. It's a very, very cool space. They've even got a book vending machine and 3D printers, and it's a really creative sort of space, which is perfect for our experts who've been working on some creative solutions. I'm not going to give too much away, but I can tell you they're working with foam, latex, and Bluetooth.
Right.
So you'll hear more about that tomorrow. But since the discussion we had at the beginning of the week, this team has gone through brainstorming sessions, focus groups, and of course, countless cups of coffee in their search for a solution. And a couple of questions, core questions, have come up. One.
Oh, and just as we're going to hear question one, the line to Nancy in the Machines Room in East London failed on us. We're going to try to reconnect to her. I suppose it's interesting to find out whether the solution that we come up with, the team comes up with tomorrow, where it applies to. We've heard loads of stories through the week. Stories from London transport, from buses and tubes here, stories from the Matatus of Nairobi. Whether there is some kind of solution that might apply everywhere, or whether there are some country-specific and city-specific things that the team can come up with. Nancy, I think we have got you back. You were just about to tell us what question one was that you were looking at.
That's right. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Keeping the suspense up. Well, question one was, can women be better prepared for these incidents? And we did go along to get some training in self-defense, which was rather interesting. I was in a chokehold for the first time, and it was very unpleasant.
Oh, wow.
But one of the things that came out of that training was this question of, but is it up to women to change their behavior? Just in the same way that many victims have not been able to go on public transport again or limit their movement, the onus shouldn't really be on the victim. So is that a viable solution? So that's one thing they've been thinking about. And I'm happy to say that they've come up with some very creative, very clever ways to tackle this problem, which of course we'll be hearing a lot more about tomorrow as we reveal what they've been working on.
Nancy Kacungira, thanks very much indeed. We look forward to that big reveal. The 100 Women Project for this week will be revealing their solution on the programme on OS this time tomorrow. This is OS on the BBC World Service, and this is a colleague from BBC Trending who sat down with us now to talk about, well, not just the hashtag #MeToo, which is one we've been talking about all the way through the week on OS, the hashtag in which people have been sharing their experiences of harassment and sexual assault, principally women, but lots of men getting involved there too. all in the wake of the allegations made against Harvey Weinstein. Elizabeth Cassin from the BBC Trending team is here. I say it's not the only hashtag, Lizzie, because there are others, aren't there, that have been cropping up too?
Yes, so the initial hashtag was #MeToo, which has been tweeted by over 1 million people. But there's been a huge reaction online with other hashtags continuing that conversation. Thousands of men have been talking about their behaviour and how they can combat sexual harassment that they see. So they've been using the hashtags How I Can Change, I Did, and I Did That. Actor Mark Ruffalo has tweeted, I will never catcall a woman again, saying it's totally inappropriate and not a compliment and something that he did when he was younger. Other Twitter users have said they would stop interrupting female co-workers and intervene when they hear locker talk, as it's known. So women have been trying to push that conversation towards men using the hashtag him though.
And the I Did one's interesting. That's people, principally men, essentially declaring what they have done in order to say that they're not going to do it again.
Yes, it's the idea that so women have come forward, they've been brave in talking about what's happened to them, but for things to change, people on Twitter are arguing that men need to be taking more responsibility for their actions. Now, one
thing that I saw on our news site today, because it came from a BBC interview, was the Welsh singer Tom Jones talking about the music industry and actually talking about his own experience when he was much younger, I think, talking about the fact that he thinks the music industry is as much in this as the film industry is.
Well, I think something that's going to be a recurring theme is that all industries could potentially be facing this problem when there is a power imbalance between men and women in those industries. But in this case, this was Tom Jones experiencing harassment earlier in his career, and he said that things happen in show business and sometimes things are covered up. He talked about an incident that left him feeling terrible, and that what's tried on women is tried on men as well.
And also, I don't know if you've been looking at this too, an apology for a New York Times op-ed on this subject from somebody getting involved in the discussion and then actually thinking better of some of the comments that she made.
Yes, that was Mayim Bialik, who is an actor from The Big Bang Theory. She's apologised for her comments. She was accused by many online for victim blaming by implying that only attractive women in Hollywood get sexually harassed. So one tweet said, someone tell Mayim Bialik you don't have to be hot to be sexually assaulted. And in response to that backlash, she has now apologised, saying what you wear and how you behave does not provide any protection from assault, nor does the way you dress or act in any way make you responsible for being assaulted. So she has somewhat gone back in her initial comments.
Thanks very much indeed. That's Elizabeth Cassin from the BBC Trending team. Check out their blog for pieces on the trending conversations of the day. Thanks very much indeed for coming down to talk to us. OS on the BBC World Service, where you can get involved in the stories that we're talking about on the radio as you listen. One of those in our bulletin at the top of the programme was about how dogs are apparently more in control of their facial expressions than we previously thought. That's according to researchers in Britain, and I did invite tweets from any dogs that are listening. I'm pleased to say that one in New Mexico has got in touch, or at least the owner, Amy, who I know listens there. Hello to you, Amy, always good to hear from you, has tweeted a picture of the dog right in the camera. Not sure how the dog's facial expression reflects on the programme. I think the dog is enjoying it, but do let us know if perhaps you've thought that in the past, what those researchers are saying is true, that maybe the dog's expression reveals more than we previously thought. So let me also take you through some of the top business headlines of the day. Business Insider's top headlines about Goldman Sachs' CEO trolling, as the paper puts it, Britain on Twitter. Lloyd Blankfein has perhaps revealed his bank's plan after Britain's left the European Union by tweeting, just left Frankfurt, great meetings, great weather, really enjoyed it, good, because I'll be spending a lot more time there, hashtag Brexit. On most business pages, a report on Apple's falling shares, speculating over poor demand for the iPhone 8. To use the jargon by one trader, the street is hypersensitive to any speed bumps around the next iPhone cycle. And it's 30 years since global stock markets crashed in an event that came to be known as Black Monday. Many of you are too young to remember that watershed moment. I certainly am just about. I probably wasn't interested in stock markets when I was 6 years old, particularly. But that was when the Dow Jones Industrial Index experienced the biggest single-day decline, dropping 22.6%. Some of you on social media are asking, could it happen again? Now then, we've talked about this next issue quite a lot and in many countries. What should women wear and who should decide? This is a conversation that's come from earlier this week when Malala Yousafzai was trolled online for appearing to wear skinny jeans and Western-style clothing. An unverified picture which showed a young woman walking in Oxford was republished in Pakistani and Indian press after being widely shared on Facebook. Other stories about dress codes have been in the Pakistani media, including a woman entering university in a white T-shirt, only to be told she was a security threat, and a dress code has now appeared online. So, with the help of our partner station Power FM in Islamabad, we've been able to find out what's being said on one of the city's university campuses.
Hi everyone, it's Anila from Power 99, an FM radio station based in Islamabad. We are near a university campus. It's lunchtime. There are a lot of guys out here having their lunch, and I can hardly see any woman, but I'm going to try and grab some women and talk to them about what they're wearing and what they think about how women dress in Pakistan.
Well, my name is Aruma.
What do you do, Aruma?
I'm doing medical.
At your university, you can wear whatever you like, or the university imposes a certain dress code on you?
No, well, we can wear whatever we like, but the dress should be not so cheap, no weird, like that. It should be acceptable to everyone.
So when you say it should be acceptable to everyone, what do you exactly mean by that?
I mean that it should be not of that much high weirdness, It should be a jeans, a normal top, and nothing else. People have, different mentality level. They should not judge you by your dressing.
So I think what you mean is if girls wear sleeveless tops and short skirts, that's something you are saying shouldn't be allowed?
That should not be allowed. It's a height of cheapness. Seriously.
But you're okay with female students at your university wearing Western clothes as long as they are dressed modestly and they're not showing any skin?
Of course, I'm okay. I don't have any concern with their personal life.
So why do you think wearing a short skirt or wearing a sleeveless top is height of cheapness?
We are not babies. So, this is basically the point of attraction for boys. They usually commit what is wrong when the girls dress like that.
Male behavior depends on how a woman dresses and behaves?
Of course, I usually believe on this.
Do you ever wear Western clothes, Aroma?
Yeah, of course I do wear. I wear tights, short shirts, not too much shorts, and that's it.
So what are you wearing today, Roma?
Semi-Western. I'm wearing tights and shirt, but not too much short. It's Western, but semi-Western. It has a Pakistani touch and an American touch.
So it's a good mix of East and West. And you're wearing a scarf as well?
Yeah, of course I'm a Muslim. My religion is basically all about your respect. It's about shame. You should not be so shameless while you're dressing yourself.
If a woman shows some skin, like even if I'm wearing a sleeveless top, then in your view, it's wrong.
It's wrong. How much skin? You're talking about this much skin? It's not wrong.
So if I'm wearing half sleeves, it's not wrong. But if I'm wearing a sleeveless top, then
it's wrong.
My name is Myra West and I'm a student of Hamdard University, Islamabad campus, studying Doctor of Pharmacy.
What are you wearing today?
I am wearing a abaya as usual. I usually wear abaya in university because in Pakistan it is more appropriate to wear abaya and it is comfortable as well.
It is appropriate to wear. Okay. And what do you think about the way women dress in Pakistan generally?
Generally, as they have their rights to wear whatever they want, but we are living in a community that if we are wearing some jeans, then people see us with weird eyes, and I don't like that type of eyes on me. That's why I'm preferring abaya over it.
Myra, do you always wear an abaya and a hijab, or only when you are at university or out and about?
When I'm out, I prefer abaya. But when I'm going on the functions, I will wear a dress that is appropriate with that function or that event.
When you are out and about, do you face any problems with the men, the way they kind of, look at you, or you think your abaya and your hijab protects you from men staring at you or causing a problem for you?
No, I don't think so, because it is for our own satisfaction. The way you see others is how you are brought up by your family. This abaya is protecting us from their staring eyes. I don't think so. I am from a family, so I prefer that I should wear abaya when I'm outside.
Kinza, what are you wearing today?
I am wearing a jean shirt with the dupatta also.
You're wearing a nice scarf today. But do you wear hijab?
Yes, I wear.
And abaya?
Yes.
Okay. So how do you decide today you are going to wear jeans and t-shirt, and the other day you are going to wear an abaya and a hijab? How do you decide that?
In university, you can also wear Western clothes.
When do you wear an abaya and a hijab?
Rural countries, mein.
Rural areas. Okay. So when Kinza travels to rural areas?
Because they have restrictions about that. Because not in the Western areas or the Western countries, they don't have.
So basically, Kinza is saying in Islamabad, there are no restrictions and she can wear jeans and t-shirts as well. But when she travels to remote areas or rural areas, then those areas are pretty conservative, traditional. Then she would wear an abaya and a hijab.
This is Razia from Gilgit-Baltistan. I recently graduated from Karakoram International University. I had bachelor degree in business administration.
Obviously, like you said, you are from Gilgit-Baltistan. Do you find any difference in people's attitudes towards the way women dress in Islamabad and in Gilgit-Baltistan?
I think people in Gilgit-Baltistan are more independent. They have the right to choose whatever they want to wear. It's not a big deal. But in Islamabad, people used to criticize each other that why they are wearing this and why they are wearing that.
How much pressure do you feel under from the community or the society in Islamabad to dress in a certain way that the people find acceptable?
It all depends on the environment where I am working or whom I am living.
Have you heard about what's recently happened to Malala, where she started studying at Oxford University and reportedly she wore jeans and shirt and boots to the university, and Pakistani people are criticizing her for that? Are you aware of that? So what do you think about it?
Yeah, I recently saw her picture on social media that people are criticizing her the way she dressed. I feel it's her right, whatever she want to wear. It should not be a problem, but the actual thing is people should focus on positivity, not negativity. So dress should not be an issue.
My name is Aman Munir. I am studying pharmacy from the Hamdard University.
And what are you wearing today, Saman?
I am wearing a gown and full hijab, and I have covered my face.
Is this a choice you have made, or has it been imposed on you by your maybe family or your university?
No, it's completely my choice, and I have done on my own choice.
Do you think in Pakistan people judge women by what they wear?
Yes. Pakistan people judge other people by their dresses and by their get-ups, what they wear. But it is not. I don't think that it's define our personality. It is our get-up, and everyone has different type of personality. The one who's wearing hijab is not necessary that she is a good person or bad person. It does not define what we are wearing and what we are.
So if our dress doesn't define who we are, a good person, bad person, then why women like yourselves decide to, wear hijabs and niqabs?
Just our choice, and we feel safe to wear that. Not that we can say that we do it for the other people, we do it for ourselves. And I don't think that our other people have to judge us on that behalf.
Okay. So you just said you wear a hijab, jilbab, a niqab because it makes you feel safe. Yes. So if you weren't wearing this, what do you think the problems that you would get from people that would make you feel unsafe? Say if you were dressed like me in shalwar kameez, not covered your face, not covered your hair, not wearing an abaya, what would the society do to you that would make you feel unsafe?
They will look at, especially the boys, they will look at me with the bad eyes or with the bad views, but I don't think that they can change myself. But if I'm wearing or I'm hijab or I'm not wearing hijab, they will look at me the same. I've examined and I have experiences about that they have looked at me at the same, either I wear or either I'm not.
So basically what you're saying is that men in Pakistan, it doesn't matter whether you are wearing a hijab or you're not wearing a hijab, men will still look at you.
Yes, they will definitely remain men. Men will be men.
Thank you very much indeed to Power FM for helping us get to hear those voices from Islamabad. You're listening to OS on the BBC. Let's finish the hour with this story. London 2012 Olympic gold medalist Michaela Moroney says she was sexually abused by the former USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar from the age of 13. We can get more on this from BBC World Service Sports' Craig Lowe. Craig, what more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, Michaela Moroney alleges she was abused over a 7-year period by Larry Nassar. In her words, the unnecessary and disgusting abuse started at the national team training camp in Texas. Writing on social media, Moroney added, "It seemed whenever and wherever this man could find the chance, I was treated. It happened in London before my team and I won the gold medal, and it happened before I won my silver. It didn't end until I left the sport."
Gosh, and I know that Moroney's not the only person making claims against him.
That's right. Hundreds of women and girls have also come forward to say they were sexually assaulted by him, according to the Indianapolis Star newspaper, which led an investigation into Nassar. However, he has denied the abuse claims. What we do know for certain is he spent almost 3 decades working with USA Gymnastics and was involved with the team at 4 Olympic Games. He's currently in prison awaiting trial in Michigan on multiple criminal sexual conduct charges, and earlier this year admitted to possessing child abuse images.
And has there been any response from USA Gymnastics, Craig?
Yeah, just to remind you, earlier this year, USA Gymnastics President and Chief Executive Steve Penny resigned following the newspaper's investigation. In a fresh statement, USA Gymnastics said it admires the courage of those like Michaela Moroney who've come forward to share their personal experiences with sexual abuse. We're sorry that any athlete has been harmed during their gymnastics career. It added it was strengthening and enhancing our policies and procedures regarding abuse.
Well, that's that story. Another story is that Juan Mata, the Manchester United and Spain midfielder, he's got his common goal campaign. He's trying to raise money, isn't he, for charity. It appears to be going from strength to strength.
Yeah, that's right. Fenerbahce's Turkey international Hasan Ali Kalderim has become the latest high-profile player to pledge 1% of their salary to Common Goal. It raises money to help worldwide football-related charities. Tomorrow we should get 2 Premier League players pledging too.
Thanks very much indeed, Craig, from World Service Sport.
This is the BBC World Service, where we're looking for solutions to the problem of domestic violence.
100 women on the BBC World Service.
The domestic violence will always happen if the men keep thinking that they have the right to hit the woman, and if the wife keep thinking that they deserve to hit by the man.
Behind closed doors. Listen to the whole series at bbcworldservice.com/100women. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
Our Latin America online editor is Vanessa Bushluter, and she is...
Let's speak now to our Moscow correspondent, Steve Rosenberg. And Steve, the reason...
Our correspondent, Bethany Bell, has been following the UN talks.
Our South America correspondent, Katie Watson, spoke to us from Sao Paulo.
At bbcworldservice.com. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello, this is OS on the BBC. I'm Ben James. We're in the middle of the BBC newsroom with another hour of news. We bring together the expertise in this room and the voices of those of you listening around the world. Now, OS stands for Outside Source. That's what we call it when we bring a feed of sound or video into the newsroom to then use in our coverage. And I can see a bunch of them on the screens right next to me. One of them shows Vladimir Putin still giving that discussion, that conversation with reporters at the Valdai Discussion Club alongside some other prominent people. The screen next to him shows a bloke with a cup of tea waiting to do an interview somewhere else. So a whole range of different feeds coming into the BBC newsroom. We'll use some of them to bring you some more stories this hour about Catalonia, the latest there. We'll also talk about a freedom of speech row at Florida University, another speaker on campus debate whether white nationalist Richard Spencer should be allowed to speak at an event or not.
Hello, I'm Marianne Marshall with the BBC News. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia of its autonomous powers on Saturday, after the regional authorities refused to back down in their push for independence. The Catalan leader, Carles Puigdemont, ignored an ultimatum and threatened to have the regional parliament ratify independence unless Madrid agreed to negotiations. Tom Burridge is in Barcelona.
Spanish officials say their government has to act, to uphold the country's law and constitution, and to rein in an unruly, disobedient regional government. The powers Madrid plans to invoke have never been used before. The Spanish constitution does not specify how they will work in practice. Essentially, the Spanish government can decide when and how it acts. But this is a sensitive moment, so when it comes to actually taking concrete measures to reduce the powers of Catalonia's devolved administration, Madrid will tread carefully and probably slowly.
The Kenyan opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has reportedly told the head of the country's electoral body that next week's rerun of September's presidential poll should be postponed. On Wednesday, the official said he could not deliver a credible election in the current circumstances. Mr Odinga has withdrawn from the vote, but speaking to reporters after his meeting, he said he would reconsider if his concerns were addressed.
If proper consultations are done and proper reforms are carried out and those fears that we raised are addressed, which made us pull out of this race, then we will consider. But as things stand right now, our position is as we announced it.
President Uhuru Kenyatta has continued campaigning and insists the vote must take place as planned. The first election was nullified by the Supreme Court. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. Charles Haviland reports.
Surrounded by Siberian mountains, Lake Baikal holds 1/5 of the world's fresh water and thousands of unique species. But Russian biologists and officials are alarmed at the rise in threats to its ecology. Because of polluted wastewater, there's been a steep fall in the numbers of the omelfish, which is only found in the lake and is an important part of the local diet. There is now a ban on commercial fishing of the omel. Other species, including invertebrates, are being killed by rotting algae. President Putin says the protection of Lake Baikal is a priority.
European Union leaders meeting in Brussels have expressed their support for the Spanish government in its dispute with Catalonia. The President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, rebuffed Catalan appeals for mediation, saying he had no intention of putting a regional leader on the same footing as a head of government. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. The car maker Nissan is suspending production in Japan because unauthorised workers have continued to carry out vehicle checks, even after being told to stop. The halt, expected to last 2 weeks, is intended to allow time to establish new certification practices. The company is already recalling 1.2 million cars because of flawed inspections. The United Nations says it's worried by reports of the forced displacement of civilians, mainly Kurds, in northern Iraq. Iraqi government forces have advanced into areas formerly controlled by the Kurdish authorities, following a referendum on Kurdish independence. The UN has urged Baghdad to ensure that all civilians are protected. The Kurdish authorities have, meanwhile, welcomed the Iraqi Prime Minister's call for dialogue over the crisis. Researchers in Britain say they found evidence that dogs are more in control of their facial expressions than previously thought, and are using them to communicate with humans. The study showed that dogs moved their faces much more when humans were paying attention to them, and that they weren't doing this because they were excited or begging for food. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, Daniel Darrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
Long before Brigitte Bardot earned herself the nickname BB, there was DD, Danielle Darrieux. It was way back in 1931, in the early years of sound films, that the French were first charmed by her performance as the teenage daughter of arriviste parents in the comedy Le Bal. Though she was lured briefly to Hollywood, the vast majority of Danielle Darrieux's more than 100 films were French. Most famously, perhaps, she starred in 1952 as the beautiful aristocrat whose diamond earrings are the centre of the plot in Madame de of Max Ophuls. The French adored her natural joie de vivre and her beauty.
BBC News.
This is the BBC newsroom that you can hear around me. It's Ben James here on OS on the BBC World Service, the programme where the door is open for you to get involved by telling your stories, sharing your perspectives, suggesting things that we could cover and responding to stuff you've already heard. We've been listening to Pakistani female students just before the news on campus in Islamabad, the debate about what they wear to lectures, what people tell them they should be wearing, and whether or not it's something they object to when they get told you must wear this, you must wear that. Agnes tweeted us from Nairobi listening, would you kindly clarify what an abaya is? A-B-A-Y-A was what was referred to, Agnes. It's a loose overgarment. It's a sort of robe-like dress, and that's probably the best way of describing it. That's what a couple of the students said they were wearing. I also mentioned earlier on we've had some Twitter response to the story you've been hearing in the bulletin about how British researchers think that dogs can communicate with their facial expressions more than previously thought. We were in some doubt whether Louis, who I now know is the dog that got in touch via its owner Amy in New Mexico earlier on, was enjoying the show or not from his facial expression. I'm told that yes, he definitely does enjoy listening to the programme, so if there are any others who are listening anywhere else in the world, do not hesitate to get in touch. Onward then with some more of the stories that we've been covering through the day and you've been talking about online too. A big one, of course, in Kenya over the last day as a result of that BBC exclusive interview yesterday that gave it a new impetus and a new huge top line for discussion in Kenya, the resignation of Rosalind Akombe, the Electoral Commission official who's now fled to New York. The Kenyan election that is due to be rerun next week is still a huge talking point. Now, we had this from BBC Monitoring, which is the part of the BBC that listens in and watches media and reads news from other organisations around the world in different languages too. We had this line from BBC Monitoring not too long ago saying that Kenya's governing Jubilee Party has filed a contempt of court case against the opposition leader Raila Odinga and his running mate Kalonzo Musyoka on their no elections call. The case was filed on Thursday the 19th of October. That's been picked up by BBC Monitoring from Kenya's Daily Nation. So we'll examine and look into that aspect of that story as we listen to somebody else who's got in touch about the whole issue of whether an election can take place next week, considering that Raila Odinga says he's not going to take part in it and considering what the Electoral Commission official that resigned has said. Have a listen to this message from a listener in Kenya we just received.
My name is Julius from Kenya. I think this election should not go ahead. We should have the election date postponed because IBC itself does not look ready to deliver a credible election. And the chairman of IBC, Mr. Jibukati, should come out and tell Kenyans what's going on because they don't look ready. IBC looks so confused. I don't think they're ready to deliver a credible election to Kenyans.
So Julius, thanks for getting in touch. He doesn't think that they're ready to deliver a credible election to Kenyans. Well, all views are welcome on this programme, so if you haven't got our WhatsApp number saved in your phone, take it down now, save it, and then send us a voice note with your own opinion. The number is this, +44 7730 75 19 25. OS on the BBC World Service. Here's a story we spotted that was being shared by lots of people and thought we should investigate a bit more on the programme. Something that's come from Saudi Arabia via, in part, Google Earth. An interesting discovery in the desert. Let's speak to Trevor Nace from the website Science Trends, live with us from Denver, Colorado. Trevor, what's been found in the middle of the Saudi desert then?
Yeah, so a professor of archaeology from the University of Western Australia was searching through Google Earth, and he happened to come across stone structures, about 400 stone structures in the desert of Saudi Arabia in a volcanic field. After investigating a little bit further, he found that the structures were well arranged, and they typically were pretty low in height and up to 1,700 feet long. But as of now, there's a lot more questions than answers, given that the only reconnaissance has been done through Google Earth.
And we'll get on to exactly what they may or may not be in a moment. But is that right that you can just, I guess, go through Google Earth, zoom in, and you might happen upon a part of the world that's not been explored in that way yet, and find something like this? That does seem extraordinary. I know the world's a big place, but still.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ben. It's pretty exciting that amateur archaeologists can just go on Google Earth. As long as you have an internet connection, you can search around and find pretty incredible things. And still today, it seems like every year we find something interesting and fascinating through Google Earth that people just haven't been to yet, or locals might know of, but the archaeological community doesn't know of.
So these structures then, are we talking about geology, something that's been naturally formed, or are we talking about archaeology, something that somebody at some time built?
So a little bit of both, but primarily the stone structures have been built and by man, and they're well arranged, and there are other structures in the area that archaeologists have found. But the interesting thing is that they lie on top of a volcanic field. So lava ran down the slopes and basically laid down an even volcanic field, and men and women went out and built these stone structures. And what we find is that some of the lava has actually overlapped on top of the stone structures, which means that they were both built during active volcanism in the area, and some of them were older than some recent volcanic eruptions in the area.
It's absolutely fascinating. I'm just wondering, has anybody yet corroborated that they are actually there? I'm just thinking, for all of Google's might and technology, could some kind of glitch be responsible, or could someone get into it and change what we're seeing in those satellite images?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the stone structures are actually known by local communities, and they're named as works of the old men, in quotes. So they are known, and they have existed for a long time, but the kind of lore behind it has been lost, and the meaning behind why they were built has been lost.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Trevor Nace is from the website Science Trends, telling us from Denver, Colorado, about those structures spotted on Google Earth in the desert in Saudi Arabia that it sounds like now will deserve some more investigation from the scientific community. Trevor, thanks for being with us. We've been talking lots on OS and across the BBC's news programmes about the situation with Catalonia, this autonomous region of Spain in which some people want independence. There was a disputed referendum a couple of weeks ago that was declared illegal by the central government. Now, in an unprecedented move, Spain is to stop
autonomy, and it will not be able to deviate from the list of measures. The announcement was made after the Catalan president refused to abandon the push for its independence. Madrid had given him until 10 a.m. local time on Thursday to do so. Catalonia is one of Spain's wealthiest and culturally distinct regions. It has some 7.5 million people. It includes the city of Barcelona. It has its own language, and it generates a fifth of Spain's 1.1 trillion euro economy. An advancement in Catalonia's independence movement can be seen from 2008. Spain entered a 5-year financial crisis that year. The country faced recession and harsh austerity measures. Many Catalans felt their wealthy region could do better on its own. In 2010, some 1 million Catalans marched through Barcelona, protesting against the Spanish Constitutional Court's ruling that year. The court ruled that the word nation to describe Catalonia had no legal value in Spain. The protesters chanted, "We are a nation, we decide." On October 1st this year, Catalonia voted overwhelmingly to leave Spain. The disputed referendum was declared invalid by the Spanish Constitutional Court. Spain has been in turmoil ever since. According to Spain's Association of Commercial Registers, more than 700 companies, including Catalan banks, have moved their offices out of Catalonia in response to the ongoing crisis.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire, from the OS team for putting that together. And it's good to take stock and just recap and remind ourselves how we got from A to B on a complicated story like this. Now, one thing that's going on today is a big European Union leaders meeting in Brussels. In fact, I can see on one of my outside sources, one of my screens to the left, the BBC's Ros Atkins standing in the middle of the press room, I think, there waiting to do a TV update on that meeting. Now, some of those European leaders and prominent people in the EU have been talking about the Catalonia story today. Let's have a listen to what the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, has been saying. He rebuffed Catalan appeals for mediation, saying he had no intention of putting a regional leader on the same footing as a head of government. Take a listen.
La Catalogna non è uno Stato. La Catalogna è una regione autonoma.
He's talking in Italian, so I'll read you the translation. Catalonia is not a state, he said. Catalonia is an autonomous region that's part of the Kingdom of Spain. That's why I don't intend to equate the Spanish government with the Catalan government. I'm in favour of dialogue, but the Spanish government's the government of the whole of Spain, including Catalonia, and the Catalan government's the autonomous government of its region. He also later on said that the EU would never recognise an independent Catalonia. I guess there are other opinions within the European Union, so it'll be interesting to see how their response to that story develops. Ben James with you in the middle of the BBC newsroom today to bring you OS here on the BBC World Service, where we weave in your voices to our news coverage of the big stories making the headlines, the stories you're talking about online as well. Let me bring you some stories from our journalists working on the BBC Africa Live page. A pastor who claimed to foresee President Robert Mugabe's death on Tuesday is apparently trying to save face now that his prophecy has not come true. According to Times Live, the pastor said that God had changed his mind. The story we discussed yesterday, the cosmetics giant brand Nivea has responded to accusations of racism over its sale of skin lightening creams in West Africa. It said it recognised concerns raised by some consumers and that its intention is to never offend our consumers. However, the company stopped short of an apology. And trigger warnings at universities have become a talking point here in the UK. One of the most read BBC News stories today is the decision by Cambridge University to warn students of English lecture timetables that Shakespeare contains gore and violence that might, quote, upset you. Lots of reaction to that on social media. Pamela Podesky tweets, emotional fragility has crossed the Atlantic. Kaylee Triller thinks, though, that it's all, quote, much ado about nothing. We're actually going to stay on university campuses now to a story that people have been discussing in the United States. A story about an issue that's come up before, actually. This is at the University of Florida in Gainesville, where some students are protesting against the university's decision to allow the white supremacist Richard Spencer to speak on campus. The university said legally it has no choice but to let Richard Spencer speak at the school, however evil and repugnant his views might be. Reports say $500,000 have been spent on security. Governor Rick Scott of Florida this week also declared a state of emergency. Let's speak to a few different people about this issue with different views on it. Let's speak to Chris Wilde, who's a senior student at UF, also to Nusrat Noor, who's a sophomore student there, and Eduardo Neres as well, who's a University of Florida student campus correspondent currently in Washington. Welcome to all three of you. Nusrat, why don't you start? I think you are taking part in the protests about this. Why?
Well, first, it's a demonstration of my First Amendment rights that are actually being used to protest this sort of hate and this discriminatory rhetoric that's being allowed onto our campus. And our administration has told us so many times to not engage and not protest and ignore him. Because that absolutely gets rid of racism, the ability to just ignore and love from afar. But that's not how it works. Movements and change has been made from proactive involvement in movements like this and speaking out against hateful, discriminatory rhetoric like this. And I just think that protesting is going to show that the Gainesville community and the U.S. community is in solidarity with marginalized students and minority students and staff and faculty, and that we're not going to just let this slide and let our administration get away with allowing this to happen on our campus.
And Nusrat, just before we introduce you to Eduardo, who I think takes a different view on this, could you just describe, Nusrat, what is happening around you? Are you in the middle of a protest now? What are people saying?
I'm at a meeting point. We're going to march to the Phillips Center soon, and people are, it's quite heartening. People are here with their signs, and they're embracing each other, and there's just a general air of friendship and togetherness, and people are being interviewed, and yeah, it's a beautiful sight to see.
Let's bring in Eduardo then, Eduardo Neret. And I didn't give you your full title, Eduardo, because you're University of Florida student campus correspondent with the site Campus Reform, which is a conservative site that looks at issues in higher education and university campuses across the US. So welcome to OS. Why don't you talk to Nusrat and explain your point of view on it and address some of the points that she made?
Sure. So I absolutely respect her wanting to protest, and I think it's great that the Gainesville community and the University of Florida too, right? I think the University of Florida has done a good job in promoting events, such as last week they had a conversation on the First Amendment. They've had trying to put a lot of counter events before Spencer's arrival so that we as a community can have a real rational discussion. I don't think you can try to have a rational discussion with people like Spencer. There's no sense in debating someone like him. And at the same time, while I do think it's fine that some students want to protest, at the same time I think we have to be careful in playing into Richard Spencer's hands. So while he does have the right to speak here, and I don't think many people would dispute that, I think by trying to get into his face and I'm not saying that that's what she's doing, but I would warn students not to get too near his event, to not protest him and his supporters one-on-one, face-to-face, because that's exactly what he wants. Richard Spencer loves nothing more than the fact that he is the topic of national and international conversation today. He wants something to happen. He loves confrontation, and I'd just rather not give him the attention, me personally, and play the whole scenario into his hands.
Interesting. I also agree that there's always going to be the threat of escalation when two groups like this with such opposing views face off against each other, and there's definitely there are precautions that have been established within the protest groups, and our goal ultimately is to have a nonviolent demonstration. About what we stand for, and while I do believe that we shouldn't give him the attention in the form of violence and escalating the situation, it's important to show him that we are not going to back down, and we're not just going to sit quietly while he tells us that our lives are worthless and that his white ethno-state is the ideal for the American continent, and it's just letting this kind of rhetoric slide is not something that we are trying to do.
No, absolutely, and I understand where you're coming from. I just feel, I guess to a certain point, and I'm not on the ground, I don't know what it looks like yet, but to a certain degree, I just think if people wouldn't show up to his event, people wouldn't talk about him, then the media wouldn't be able to talk about a story if no one's there. And then if there's no story, he goes away, nobody cares about him, and it'll dissipate like that. So that's part of my feeling on it. And I get it, there's a fine line. I understand and respect people who want to protest. I just hope that it doesn't add to his negative reputation and allow him to get across the airwaves today.
Let's bring in Chris as well, who's waiting to speak. Chris, how do you see that argument from Eduardo that by protesting you are giving prominence to a guy that I'm sure, well, I think all three of you agree, does not deserve that prominence?
Hi, I have to fully disagree on that. I think that if you look at history, it's an ahistorical view to believe that not protesting Richard Spencer's event would be an effective way to dismantle white supremacy. Richard Spencer and his entire group are already getting national attention, and there are media and military all over campus, not just where he is speaking at the Phillips Center. So he's already gotten that publicity, but people need to know that his point of view is being opposed. And instead of allowing us to echo those statements, the university administration is overly theorizing the First Amendment of freedom of speech, and they're clouding Richard Spencer's belief in ethnic cleansing, which is a euphemism for genocide of people of color. So we're allowed to express our discontent and our opposition to ethnic cleansing and genocide, and we're going to do that. And when somebody stands up and believes in genocide, if you look at history, if you look at Nazi Germany, the solution is never to look away. It's never to ignore them. It's never to protest from a distance. It's always to cut it as soon as it's beginning. And that's what we're trying to do. But the university has been supporting the efforts of Richard Spencer and his team over the efforts of students.
Well, I would have to disagree that the university has been supporting Richard Spencer's effort. I mean, I think their hands are tied. Look, as a public institution, the university doesn't have a choice. They can't say, well, we'll allow X speaker to speak on campus, but we can't allow Y speaker because we think their views are too far. I mean, that is part of the First Amendment. You're either for it or you're not. You can't say, oh, I believe in the First Amendment, but. And I think that's the situation the university has gotten into. Their hands are tied. And look, I agree with you, and I think that's fine that students are protesting and things like that. I would just say I think counter demonstrations, as the university has put on throughout the week, before his event has even happened, those are more effective. Having your own events or having more protests away from Spencer himself, I think are more effective, because you're not going to be able to convince people who are going to support Spencer that their ideas are wrong. But I think for the university, for their own reasons, not to counter Spencer's event specifically, for the university, for their own reasons, to want to protest, have events, have discussions, I think that's a fabulous idea. And also, too, I think you mentioned wanting to end Richard Spencer's views, ending these white supremacist views. I think you can go further to ending these views than just standing and protesting. I think you can have things like teaching young children, because racism comes from the household. People aren't inherently born like this, they're taught this. So as a community, there are other ways you can combat this than just protesting. We can look at where these things are breeding.
So Eduardo, you would argue that, because we're a bit short of time, but you're arguing that people like Nusrat and Chris should be channeling their efforts and their energy into educating people, for example. Nusrat, how would you respond to that? Do you do that already? Perhaps you do.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Maybe she can't hear. Yeah, because it's quite noisy there, isn't it, where you are? Maybe, Chris, you heard me. Is it the fact, Chris, that you do that already?
Yeah, we actually had a teach-in on Tuesday night, and the room in which the teach-in took place was packed out. People were on the floor and outside. So we're simultaneously using those tactics, but right now we're also using the tactic of openly demonstrating hate speech. And the university's hands are not exactly tied. They chose not to go to court, so we don't know what that verdict would have been, and things have changed since the violence that took place in Charlottesville where someone died.
Chris, and I have to stop you there. Of course, the shadow of what happened in Charlottesville is a key thing in this conversation too, and so we'll continue to have it on OS. We'll keep an eye on that event. Thanks to all three of you.
You're with the BBC World Service, where we're exploring the lives, opportunities and daily challenges of women around the globe.
100 Women on the BBC World Service.
This place offers a chance to build a different kind of society from the ground up.
Hopefully one day they will accept the idea that a woman can do something. A woman can be whatever she wants.
The thing is, you can't expect results immediately. You have to take everything one step at a time.
Join us for a season of stories and solutions from 100 of the world's most inspiring women.
One of the most important messages that I can give is to try and strive to be more than you think you can. Because for me, I got to live my dream.
The BBC's 100 Women.
They need to know that these girls are their sisters and these girls need to be respected.
On radio, TV and at bbcworldservice.com/100women.
We're in the middle of the BBC Newsroom on OS, live on the BBC World Service. I'm Ben James. We're actually trying to find out why there was a smattering of applause from colleagues. You might have heard that towards the end of the last segment. We'll tell you why when we know. And also we're going to tell you why George W. Bush is trending worldwide, what he's been saying and how people are responding. We'll come to that in just a couple of minutes here on OS, at BBC OS, to get in touch.
BBC News with Marion Marshall. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia of its autonomous powers on Saturday, after the regional authorities refused to back down in their push for independence. The cabinet will draw up measures for formal approval by the Senate. The step was announced after the Catalan leader, Carles Puigdemont, threatened to have the regional parliament ratify independence unless Madrid agreed to negotiations. European Union leaders have arrived for a summit in Brussels, stressing their unity. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, said they were united in support for Spain over the crisis in Catalonia and united behind the EU's negotiator Michel Barnier in the Brexit talks. Over dinner, they'll hear the British Prime Minister Theresa May set out her latest thoughts about Britain's withdrawal. The Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga has reportedly told the head of the country's electoral body that next week's rerun of September's presidential poll should be postponed. On Wednesday, the official, Wafula Chebukati, said he could not deliver a credible election in the current circumstances. The United Nations says it's worried by reports of the forced displacement of civilians, mainly Kurds, in northern Iraq. Iraqi government forces have advanced into areas formerly controlled by the Kurdish authorities, including the city of Kirkuk, following a referendum on Kurdish independence. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the Siberian lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. They say more must be done to stop polluted water flowing into the lake, killing its unique flora and fauna. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, the actress Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Starting at the age of 14, Danielle Darrieux played opposite some of the biggest names of the day. BBC News.
This is OS on the BBC World Service with Ben James in the middle of this, the BBC newsroom in London, where the applause you heard just before the news was for a colleague who's leaving. We're in the middle of the floor of journalists producing some of the news you're watching on TV, you're listening to here on the radio, and you're reading on the BBC News app and online. Some of the places we'll take you to this half hour include India, Pakistan, and also to Senegal with our business team. But first of all, let's tell you why George W. Bush is climbing as a Twitter trend in the United States, the former president who has been making a speech in New York City. He hinted at his dissatisfaction with Donald Trump, and that's what lots of people are focusing on. He said in the speech that, quote, bullying and prejudice has become a caustic norm in American public life. Let's hear some of what he said.
In recent decades, public confidence in our institutions has declined. Our governing class has often been paralyzed in the face of obvious and pressing needs. The American dream of upward mobility seems out of reach for some who feel left behind in a changing economy. Discontent deepened and sharpened. Bigotry seems emboldened. Our politics
of the Senegal River estuary. It was founded by French colonizers in the 17th century, so now it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. What's interesting about this whole area is that the island of St. Louis is protected from the open ocean, the Atlantic, by a narrow strip of land. This is called the Langue de Barbarie. It hangs down from Mauritania in the north and stretches right down 30 kilometers to the south of St. Louis. It's narrow, a few hundred meters wide, densely populated, home to a big fishing community, and it's being eaten away by the sea. Now, I was there again 3 years ago, and there was a huge beach when I visited, and this time it's gone, and I saw houses tumbling into the ocean, and things are going faster now because of an intervention by the government to try and solve a different problem. So if you're still with me by this point, St. Louis suffers serious flooding. As I said, it's an island in an estuary. 2003, the government cut a channel through this protective strip of land a few kilometres down to help water escape to gush out into the open ocean. This has created a suction effect, pulling sand from the fishing villages, which is causing their houses to fall into the ocean. And at the same time, another thing has happened. This channel they cut initially was 4 meters wide. Now it's grown to a whopping 6 kilometers. It's something nobody's predicted. Vast amounts of this protective strip of land have been washed away, leaving villages on the river open to a full frontal assault of the sea. And I've been down to see some of the effects.
This island was 200 meters more in the river. Here there was sand and gardens.
On a long wooden fishing boat known as a pirogue, Jean-Marie Dupart takes me on a tour of the estuary around the breach. He points out what remains of a village, completely submerged in water.
You can see there are the trees in the river, and the tree who is here, it was a tree who was and the schoolhouse.
When it was created in 2003, the artificial opening was 5 meters wide. Now, 14 years later, it's a whopping 6 kilometers wide, a development no one predicted. Vast amounts of the protective strip of land have been washed away, exposing villages that were on the bank of the Senegal River to the full frontal assault of the sea.
When the bridge in 2008 was in front of the village, in 5 years, all the island was under the water. In 5 years.
The village of Doune Babadier has been completely destroyed, and hundreds of people have been forced to relocate inland to areas with no electricity, no water, and no land for them to farm. Amet Dieng is the village chief.
It was a real shock when all of a sudden your house and where you work disappear. All the inhabitants of Doune Babadier were in shock. We didn't know what to do. We didn't have the means to go somewhere else. I am angry because we were not consulted about the breach. They didn't ask our opinion about it.
Jean-Marie says that if nothing is done to protect the coast by the island of St. Louis, then Senegal's old capital could also go underwater.
In 5 or 10 years in St. Louis, if a bridge comes, all the town is under the water.
Wow, so I was talking about being lucky to be by the sea. Of course, it creates a livelihood for people, and people might find it pleasant to have their houses there, but when that's happening, it becomes a real danger and a threat to them. How much is this threatening the livelihoods of those people in the area?
Well, it's all pretty drastic. The village of Doune Babadier you heard about there, it's been destroyed. People's lives have been turned upside down. They used to fish and farm on this silty soil from the river, and when I visited them at where they now live, it's parched dry. They were allowed to tack houses onto another village that was already there, but they weren't given any of that other village's land, so they still can't farm. And they're much further from the sea, so fishing is harder. And if you go further up to St. Louis, the fishing village there, they used to keep their boats on the beach, and now there is no beach, so they have to keep them on the other side in the river. And to get out to sea, they have to navigate this breach, this channel, which is dangerous, and over 100 fishermen have died trying to get out. And then another thing, there's hotels and tourism. I was told that there were 2 main hotels on the Langue de Barbarie that got washed away. Jean-Marie, who we heard from, spoke of dramatic scenes on New Year's Eve a few years ago where the water finally came up to one of the hotels and they were finally decided at the last minute to cart everything out and make an escape. So there are lots of people affected.
So is there anything that they can do about it? Has anybody suggested any solutions that might work?
I think the thing to point out here is that what has happened has been the result of an attempted solution to resolve another problem. It's a very sensitive environment, and as soon as humans make a policy to try and save one area or affect another, it has other repercussions, and this is what this area is finding out. So nothing much has been done at the moment because everyone's so shocked that this is happening and watching it unfold over a series of years. The sea wall was built in St. Louis. I saw it, but most of it has given way. People are saying that they've seen experts with clipboards in recent years come to survey the area and figure out a solution. I spoke to the deputy mayor, who says that the government is giving them money to build wave breaks, which are out to sea, which should stop the force of the waves coming in and hopefully stop erosion, but they say they want more. But for the villages further south, now underwater, nothing can be done. The breach is 6 kilometres wide, you can't plug that gap, and you can't stop the sea washing away more.
Marie Keyworth, thank you very much indeed for explaining that issue from Dakar in Senegal. Perhaps you're listening somewhere else in the world where you're next to the sea and the human interaction with it has had similarly drastic effects, and perhaps you've come up with a solution where you are. You can get in touch with us on WhatsApp, share your story about that, +44 7730 75 19 25, and you can send us a voice message to explain. You're listening to OS on the BBC World Service. It's 5:42 here in London. Let's spend some time in South Africa now, where a former ANC MP has accused the country's top sports administrator of rape. Let's get Nomsa Maseko to explain this from Johannesburg, our Southern Africa correspondent. Tell us about what's happening here, Nomsa. Who's accusing whom?
Well, this former ANC Member of Parliament and musician Jennifer Ferguson who now lives in Sweden, has told the country through a blog which she posted yesterday and also on Facebook that she was raped by the head of the South African Football Association, Danny Jordan. Now, if you'd recall who Danny Jordan is, he is the man who successfully brought the South African 2010 World Cup bid here in South Africa, and now he's been accused of rape. We have been trying to get hold of him, but even his mobile phone, even his spokesperson have not been available for comment. Now, what Ms. Ferguson has been saying is that she was invited to sing at a gala dinner which was hosted by South Africa's sporting bodies in 1993, which is 24 years ago, and then she described how Mr. Jordan accompanied her to a suite after she finished singing, and she then says that she told him to wait outside. But instead, she claims that Mr. Jordan entered her room and forcefully grabbed her and raped her. And she also says that Mr. Jordan left immediately without saying a word. She further then says that her intention is not to punish the perpetrator, but to bring to light the truth, which she says she has been hiding because of years of shame.
And what does the law say in South Africa, Noms? So the allegation is that this took place 24 years ago. Does that change anything in terms of whether somebody could be prosecuted for it should they be found guilty?
Well, South Africa's Criminal Procedure Act provides for a 20-year prescription period, and this claim made by Jennifer Ferguson is 24 years old. But having spoken to South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority, they're saying that rape in most circumstances is an exception to the rule. And I do believe what they're saying is true, because you would know that Bob Hewitt, a former tennis champion who was sentenced to 6 years in prison last year after being convicted for raping 2 young women and sexually assaulting another in the 80s. And he had been coaching these women in the 80s when they were teenagers. So according to South African law, if such evidence is brought forward, they can prosecute and even possibly successfully convict someone for rape.
Thanks very much indeed. Nomsa Maseko is our Southern Africa correspondent, live with us from Johannesburg. You're listening to OS on the BBC World Service. It's Ben James sitting in the middle of the BBC newsroom, taking you through the stories that you're getting in touch to talk to us about, the stories the journalists around me are working on. Here are some of them. I was just scanning down the global Twitter trends of the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th on that list right now is McLaren, because it's been confirmed that Fernando Alonso will continue to drive in the Formula One competition for McLaren in 2018. He's signed a new deal which is believed to be for a year, with options to extend as well. Prosecutors in Brazil have formally charged the former head of the country's Olympic Committee with corruption during the campaign to win last year's games for Rio de Janeiro. Carlos Nuzman is accused of running a criminal organisation, money laundering and violating currency laws. And there's been a cabinet reshuffle in the United Arab Emirates. They've appointed Omar bin Sultan as the country's first ever Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence. Such a big issue, and one that is an interesting one to talk about, and we will do again, artificial intelligence here on OS. We're going to talk about air pollution though now, and a big debate in India about it and about religion. The news that India's Supreme Court has banned selling firecrackers during the festival of Diwali. Now, not a new story, but it is Diwali today, so happy Diwali if you are celebrating it in India or elsewhere in the world. Many in India are using the hashtag Right to Breathe in support of the ban. Others say it unfairly targets India's Hindu, Sikh and Jain communities who customarily use fireworks to help celebrate the Festival of Lights. Now, we've been reaching out on the WhatsApp phone to our listeners across India for their thoughts. Here are some of the messages that we've received.
My name is Gurshan Singh Kohli, and I'm a filmmaker from New Delhi, India. We welcome this order of Supreme Court to ban firecrackers. This is not about religion. This is about ecological, the quality of air and health of citizens. If you're living in Delhi, you will come to know what is air pollution.
Sunil Date, Pune. Human being is a social animal, and as a social animal, human beings need to celebrate and express their joy. Now, if this cannot be done by crackers, what other alternative is there? If it means electric lights, then they cause pollution at the source of power generation. If it means using paper requires destroying forests. So what other way can the human being celebrate? It cannot be a law. It can be an appeal.
This is Vinay Verma from Ahmedabad, Gujarat. This is a very good step to ban the firecrackers. With pollution levels rising high, the right to survive and right to life becomes very important. There are better ways of celebrating a festival, better civilized ways. In a poor country like India, where 30% live below poverty line, firecrackers are a waste of resources. Light the diyas, light the candles, share your resources with the needy ones, share with the community. This is a better way to celebrate.
OS on the BBC. Some voices from India there. Let's have some voices on the programme now from Pakistan, where there's been a big conversation about what women wear on university campuses, starting with comments on what Malala Yousafzai is wearing in an unverified picture at Oxford University. We've been spending time on campus in Islamabad thanks to our partner station Power FM, speaking to women on campus there.
Hi everyone, it's Anila from Power 99, an FM radio station based in Islamabad. We are near a university campus. It's lunchtime. There are a lot of guys out here having their lunch, and I can hardly see any woman, but I'm going to try and grab some women and talk to them about what they're wearing and what they think about how women dress in Pakistan.
Well, my name is Aruma.
What do you do, Aruma?
I'm doing medical.
At your university, you can wear whatever you like, or the university imposes a certain dress code on you?
No, well, we can wear whatever we like, but the dress should be not so cheap, no weird like that. It should be like acceptable to everyone.
So when you say it should be acceptable to everyone, what do you exactly mean by that?
I mean that it should be not of that much high weirdness, it should be a jeans, a normal top and nothing else. People have, different mentality level. They should not judge you by your dressing.
So I think what you mean is if girls wear sleeveless tops and short skirts, that's something you are saying shouldn't be allowed?
That should not be allowed. It's a height of cheapness. Seriously.
But you're okay with female students at your university wearing Western clothes as long as they are dressed modestly and they're not showing any skin?
Of course, I'm okay. I don't have any concern with their personal life.
So why do you think wearing a short skirt or wearing a sleeveless top is height of cheapness?
We are not babies. So, this is basically the point of attraction for boys. They usually commit what is wrong when the girls dress like that.
Male behavior depends on how a woman dresses and behaves?
Of course, I usually believe on this.
Do you ever wear Western clothes, Aroma?
Yeah, of course I do wear. I wear tights, short shirts, not too much shorts. And that's it.
So what are you wearing today, Aroma?
Semi-Western. I'm wearing tights and shirt, but not too much short. It's Western, but semi-Western. It has a Pakistani touch and an American touch.
So it's a good mix of East and West. And you're wearing a scarf as well?
Yeah, of course, I'm a Muslim. My religion is basically all about your respect. It's about shame. You should not be so shameless while you're dressing yourself.
If a woman shows some skin, like even if I'm wearing a sleeveless top, then in your view, it's wrong.
It's wrong. How much skin? You're talking about like this much skin. It's not wrong.
So if I'm wearing half sleeves, it's not wrong. But if I'm wearing a sleeveless top, then
it's wrong.
My name is Myra West and I'm a student of Hamdard University, Islamabad campus, studying Doctor of Pharmacy.
What are you wearing today?
I am wearing a abaya as usual. I usually wear abaya in university because in Pakistan it is more appropriate to wear abaya and it is comfortable as well.
It is appropriate to wear. Okay. And what do you think about the way women dress in Pakistan generally?
Generally, as they have their rights to wear whatever they want, but we are living in a community that if we are wearing some jeans, then people see us with weird eyes, and I don't like that type of eyes on me. That's why I'm preferring abaya over it.
Myra, do you always wear an abaya and a hijab, or only when you are at university or out and about?
When I'm out, I prefer abaya. But when I'm going on the functions, I will wear a dress that is appropriate with that function or that event.
When you are out and about, do you face any problems with the men, the way they kind of, look at you, or you think your abaya and your hijab protects you from men staring at you or causing a problem for you?
No, I don't think so, because it is for our own satisfaction. The way you see others is how you are brought up by your family. This abaya is protecting us from their staring eyes. I don't think so. I am from a family, so I prefer that I should wear abaya when I'm outside.
Kinza, what are you wearing today?
I am wearing a jean shirt with the dupatta also.
You're wearing a nice scarf today and a hijab.
This is Razia from Gilgit-Baltistan. I recently graduated from Karakoram International University. I had bachelor degree in business administration.
Obviously, like you said, you are from Gilgit-Baltistan. Do you find any difference in people's attitudes towards the way women dress in Islamabad and in Gilgit-Baltistan?
I think people in Gilgit-Baltistan are more independent. They have the right to choose whatever they want to wear. It's not a big deal. But in Islamabad, people used to criticize each other that why they are wearing this and why they are wearing that.
How much pressure do you feel under from the community or the society in Islamabad to dress in a certain way that the people find acceptable?
It all depends on the environment where I am working or whom I am living.
Have you heard about what's recently happened to Malala, where she started studying at Oxford University and reportedly she wore jeans and shirt and boots to the university, and Pakistani people are criticizing her for that? Are you aware of that? So what do you think about it?
Yeah, I recently saw her picture on social media that people are criticizing her the way she dressed. I think or I feel it's her right, whatever she wants to wear. It should not be a problem, but the actual thing is people should focus on positivity, not negativity. So dress should not be an issue.
My name is Saman Munir. I am studying pharmacy from the Hamdard University.
And what are you wearing today, Saman?
I am wearing a gown and full hijab, and I have covered my face.
Is this a choice you have made, or has it been imposed on you by your maybe family or your university?
No, it's completely my choice, and I have done it on my own choice.
Do you think in Pakistan people judge women by what they wear?
Yes. Pakistan people judge other people by their dresses and by their get-ups, what they wear. But it is not. I don't think that it's define our personality. It is our get-up, and everyone has different type of personality. The one who's wearing hijab is not necessary that she is a good person or bad person. It does not define what we are wearing and what we are.
So if our dress doesn't define who we are, a good person, bad person, then why women like yourselves decide to, wear hijabs and niqabs?
Just our choice, and we feel safe to wear that. Not that we can say that we do it for the other people. We do it for ourselves, and I don't think that our other people have to judge us on that behalf.
some of the voices of students on campus in Islamabad speaking to us on our partner station Power FM a bit earlier on. Thanks to them for helping us out with that. Let me just bring you some breaking news before the end of this edition of OS. Breaking news on the Liberian election that we were speaking about at length last week. The search for a successor to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf as president. I'm looking on the website of the National Elections Commission, tipped off by the Reuters news agency on this actually. They have now posted the results from the first round. George Weah, former World Footballer of the Year, is ahead, 38.4% of the vote, 10 percentage points ahead of his closest rival, who's the current Vice President Joseph Boakai. He got 28.8%, so they will now face one another in a runoff next month to find out who will be the next president of Liberia. So that just coming in the last few minutes. They're posting on their Facebook page, the Elections Commission, some videos of that announcement. We'll continue to cover that story here on OS, of course.
This is the BBC World Service, where we're looking for solutions to the problem of domestic violence.
100 women on the BBC World Service.
The domestic violence will always happen if the men keep thinking that they have the right to hit the woman, and if the wife keep thinking that they deserve to hit by the man.
Behind closed doors. Listen to the whole series at bbcworldservice.com/100women. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
Our Latin America online editor is Vanessa Bushluter, and she is...
Let's speak now to our Moscow correspondent, Steve Rosenberg. And Steve,
our correspondent, Bethany Bell, has been following the UN talks.
Our South America correspondent, Katie Watson, spoke to us from Sao Paulo.
At bbcworldservice.com. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to Outlook, the programme that takes you around the world through extraordinary personal stories. I'm Matthew Bannister. Today, the country singer who helped fans to escape America's worst mass shooting of modern times.
We thought it was fireworks at the beginning, about the first 3 rounds. And all I remember is the guy about 10 feet in front of us goes down. The guy to the right of him about 4 feet over goes down. And when I look over my shoulder to the right, 2 girls go down. And at that time, I kind of froze.
Brian Hopkins led a group of people into a freezer trailer to hide from the gunfire.
I got up to open up the door, and it sounded like the gunfire was right next to us. And at that point, I went to reach for my phone because people were calling loved ones. And I thought, I'm going to make a video for my family.
Hear Brian's dramatic story in full on today's Outlook after the latest BBC News.
Hello, I'm Marion Marshall with the BBC News. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia of its autonomous powers on Saturday, invoking Article 155, a constitutional provision that has never been used. This morning, the Catalan leader, Carles Puigdemont, ignored an ultimatum and threatened to have the regional parliament ratify independence unless Madrid agreed to negotiations. The Spanish government spokesman, Íñigo Méndez de Vigo, said the government would do what was required to enforce Spanish law.
No one should doubt that the government will use all means available to it to restore legality and constitutional order as soon as possible, to regain peaceful coexistence for citizens and to stop the political and judicial insecurity, for which the only ones responsible are the leaders of the Catalan government.
European Union leaders meeting in Brussels have expressed their support for the Spanish government in its dispute with Catalonia. The President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, rebuffed Catalan appeals for mediation, saying he had no intention of putting a regional leader on the same footing as a head of government. The United Nations says it's worried by reports of the forced displacement of civilians, mainly Kurds, in northern Iraq. Iraqi government forces have advanced into areas formerly controlled by the Kurdish authorities, following a referendum on Kurdish independence. Here's our Arab Affairs editor, Alan Johnston.
The UN says it's heard of armed groups burning about 150 homes around the city of Tuz Khormatu on Monday and Tuesday. There were also reports of houses belonging to Kurdish political officials being dynamited. This comes against the background of a complete transformation of the security situation in the region. Moves by the Kurds to break away from the rest of Iraq gave rise to serious tension. This led to the Iraqi military moving in and taking over some disputed, multi-ethnic areas where Kurdish forces had been in control.
Attempts to resolve a growing electoral crisis in Kenya do not appear to have made progress ahead of next week's rerun of August's presidential poll. The opposition leader, Raila Odinga, met the head of the Electoral Commission and reportedly asked him to postpone the election. As Anne Soy reports from Nairobi, the president insists the vote must take place.
President Uhuru Kenyatta remains on the campaign trail, keen to take part in the fresh election on Thursday next week. In a tweet, the president says there will be no sitting in boardrooms to negotiate and share government. The Electoral Commission's chairman, Wafula Chebukati, remains optimistic, even after announcing that it was difficult to guarantee a credible election. Opposition leader Raila Odinga has withdrawn his candidature and called for mass protests on election day. The country is in limbo.
You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. A Pakistani Islamist militant group says its leader, Omar Khalid Khorasani, has been killed in a suspected American drone attack near the Afghan border. A spokesman for Jamaat al-Ahrar said 9 other militants were also killed. The militant outfit, a faction of the Pakistani Taliban, is blamed for several attacks inside Pakistan. Media reports say there's been a sudden increase in the number of drone attacks in the past week. High security is in place at the University of Florida as it prepares for a speech by one of America's most controversial white nationalists. Hundreds of police officers in body armour are on patrol at its main campus in Gainesville. The speaker, Richard Spencer, helped organise a demonstration in Charlottesville 2 months ago, which ended in violence and 1 death. Mr. Spencer used laws on free speech to organise the event. An anti-Nazi protest rally is planned. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. Charles Haviland has more details.
Surrounded by Siberian mountains, Lake Baikal holds 1/5 of the world's fresh water and thousands of unique species. But Russian biologists and officials are alarmed at the rise in threats to its ecology. Because of polluted wastewater, there's been a steep fall in the numbers of the omelfish, which is only found in the lake and is an important part of the local diet. There is now a ban on commercial fishing of the omel. Other species, including invertebrates, are being killed by rotting algae. President Putin says the protection of Lake Baikal is a priority.
A Spanish tourist in Florence has been killed by a falling stone fragment in one of the Italian city's main churches. It happened in the Basilica of the Holy Cross, which is the burial site of luminaries including Michelangelo and Galileo. Officials said it appeared that a marble capital from the top of one of the columns became dislodged. BBC News.
I'm Matthew Bannister and you're with Outlook. Today, are you familiar with any of these words?
Zwir. An Exmoor word for the whirring noise made by a group of birds as it takes flight. Shivelight and shadow tackle. A pair of words for the fast-moving lances of light and shade that fall through the canopy of a wood or a forest on a bright and windy day. Wolflight. Twilight. The period in the day when the familiar becomes wild, when dog turns to wolf.
We'll be hearing more from the British author who's determined to get you using those words. Also today, the young Zimbabwean mother of 5 with no education who wrote down her dreams and buried them in the ground. We'll find out if she made them come true. And we'll take a little trip to see the world's oldest tortoise on the remote island of St. Helena. But first, on Sunday the 1st of October, the USA experienced its worst mass shooting in modern history. Stephen Paddock from the state of Nevada opened fire on people attending a country music festival in Las Vegas. He shot at the crowd with an automatic rifle from his hotel room, killing 58 people and injuring more than 500 others. Brian Hopkins is the lead singer of a band called Elvis Monroe, who'd played at the festival before. But this year, he was just there to listen to the music as an audience member. He told us about the atmosphere before the shooting began.
Here's a song we all learned in about the 1st grade. Let's sing it together. Sing God bless America. Land that I love.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful day out. People are running around in shorts and cowboy boots. I mean, it was country music. So many people coming together, thousands of people, and nothing other than just great music, great entertainment. I mean, Big and Rich were on stage. You know, I just remember a moment where they had everybody turn their lights on their cameras and just lit up the place. So there's thousands of lights in the air, and it was awesome. And I saw a couple of girls that had asked to take a photo with me the day before. So we ended up sneaking up right behind them, tapped them on the shoulder, and I joked around and called them my echoes because both their names were Nicole, and I remember that when they introduced themselves to me the day before.
The two girls joined Brian and his bandmate Ben to enjoy the concert. But the mood changed after the main act, Jason Aldean, had taken to the stage.
And it was about 4 songs into it when things started to go badly. We thought it was fireworks at the beginning, about the first 3 rounds. And all I remember is the guy about 10 feet in front of us goes down. The guy to the right of him about 4 feet over goes down. And when I look over my shoulder to the right, 2 girls go down. And at that time, I kind of froze. And Ben grabs my shoulder and says, "Run." And he takes off running almost directly behind me. But I reached out and grabbed the 2 girls in front of me. I grabbed their hands. And I just kind of weaved these girls through the crowd. And I had lost Ben because Ben fell down and got ran over. And all we're hearing is their shots firing, people screaming.
Brian remembered a route out of the stadium near the backstage area, but when he got there, it was fenced off, so he needed to find another way out. By now, a group of people were following him.
I noticed a refrigerator trailer, and there was someone standing in the doorway, just kind of, it was peaked. It was kind of, the door was kind of open a little bit. And when we ran over there, they opened up the door, and I started to lift the 2 Nicoles inside and stood there helping anyone who wanted inside. It was cold. The 2 girls that I was with, both the Nicoles, were trying to calm down. One girl who was screaming hysterically, and we were trying to stay quiet.
Not sure what's going on out there. We're in this ice cooler right now.
And I kept pacing back and forth, and there was one gentleman who was screaming, punching the walls. He was being obnoxious. He was opening up a cooler and wanting a beer, and he kept saying it. And I don't know what he was thinking. I think, being in the sun, having alcohol all day, maybe not being able to compute what was going on. But at one point, I got up to open up the door, and it sounded like the gunfire was right next to us. And at that point, I went to reach for my phone because people were calling loved ones, and I thought, I'm going to make a video for my family.
Some sort of shooting or something at Jason Aldean concert.
We opened up the door, me and a couple of guys, and someone, and I want to say it was a catering company that was outside of it, through the ramp that led into the refrigerator. They threw it over the fence. It was kind of steep and hard to get up over, but when we opened up the door, it was there, and there was breaking gunfire. So I started helping people out of the refrigerator onto the ground, and the girls started helping people over. There was a guy who jumped over the fence and was catching people on the other side. Everyone was helping each other get up over the fence.
Many people escaped over that fence, but not everyone could make it.
But it came down to the one girl who was hysterical. I remember her saying that she screamed and started crying, panicking again, that she can't jump the fence because she just had back surgery. So I had told her I would jump over first ahead of her and catch her, and she'd be fine. But when it came down to it, I thought there was only 3 of us left. Everyone had been over the fence, and I went to go help the girls, and they wouldn't leave me. They were like, "We're not leaving without you." And so I told them, "You go, and I'm right behind you." And I tried to get them up, and they started slipping. The one Nicole had, her boots were slipping on this metal. So I just grabbed her by the waist off of it about midway up, grabbed the other Nicole, and said, "We're going to find another way out." And I look to my right, and I hear over my left shoulder, "This way, this way." It was a police officer who came running at us, waving his arms, pointing in what direction to go, and then took off in what I called hell. He took off to all the screaming, the gunfire, right into it. And so I grabbed the Nicoles, and I just started running along the wall, the direction that he told us to go. So he pointed us to safety. And so we ran out, and it was the scariest part was seeing bodies. We saw 3 bodies.